man must do his bit.
Welcome to another edition of The Public Interest. We continue our examination of Guyana's foreign policy. Of course, foreign policy cannot stand on its own. It's a reflection of domestic policy, so both have to work together. Today, we're going to look at Guyana's concept of a continental destiny. I think you know that every Guyanese president, sooner or later, wends his way or her way to Brasilia, the largest country on the continent, a country with which we have the longest border. But when we speak of continental destiny, what do we mean? I, myself, normally speak of Guyana being a continental country with Caribbean characteristics. But is there a contradiction in the terms? Is it contradictory for Guyana, a continental state, to really also be a CARICOM state? Well, the truth is, of course, that the headquarters of the Caribbean community is in Guyana. And as you know, no part of Guyana is washed by the Caribbean Sea. But certainly, we can't escape geography. As they say in international relations, you could choose your friends, but you can't choose your neighbors, and we're here forever. We have to come to terms with this concept of continental destiny. Are we destined to see our economy develop as part of the continent of South America, or are we really a part of the Caribbean and we just seem to be out of place in this large continent? So let us look at the whole question of the apparent contradiction between continental destiny and Caribbean statehood. We are certainly part of CARICOM. That is an actuality. But whether we have a continental destiny is a question of aspiration. Perhaps we hope to. And despite the visits of our presidents to Brasilia, I myself have gone there a couple of times, we need to understand the concept so we don't just go dreaming about a destiny which will never be fulfilled. We shouldn't delude ourselves that we are a big player on this continent, when in fact we are quite a small player, and there are many impediments to Guyana's integration in the continent of South America. So we're looking at aspiration versus actualization. And in our own minds, as Guyanese citizens, we should not be confused. I do not think that we should ever think of surrendering our Caribbean identity. And at the same time, it's impossible for us to ever get away from the geographical actuality that we are part of the continent of South America. So I don't see a contradiction. We can do both. We can walk on both legs. We have to. And perhaps we can make this dichotomy work for us. We can make the continental and the Caribbean characteristics work for us. The truth is that Guyana has fairly good relations with some of the South American countries. Not all. I think there are probably about 2 countries with which we don't have diplomatic relations. I don't think we have diplomatic relations with Paraguay or with Bolivia, but certainly with other countries, Argentina, Chile, certainly the neighboring countries, Venezuela, Brazil, and so on. Colombia, these are very important, and some of the contacts are quite strong, very important too. But we are a dwarf among giants. This is a huge continent, a continent of over 18 million square kilometers. I mean, Guyana likes to think it's a big country, in Caribbean terms, but in South American terms, in continental terms, we are one of the smallest states on the continent. Our population of less than 1 million is overwhelmed by the continent's population of over 425 million persons. So we are not a big player in terms of either geographical size or demographic size. And in terms of our defense force, it is quite small. There are about 1.7 million troops in arms on this continent with all of the different states. And I wouldn't mention the size of the Guyana Defense Force, but it is quite small by comparison. How then could Guyana contribute to this huge continent that we find ourselves located in? Even our economy, I mean, our gross national income is infinitesimal compared with the industrial giants in this country. Countries like Brazil, Argentina, which have established industries over 100 years ago. But we could look at what advantages we have. I often like to compare small states, and Guyana is a small state, with the stories that we heard during our childhood, and particularly one of Anansi. Anansi was regarded as one of the smallest and weakest creatures in the jungle, but it was the most clever. And Anansi was able to trick lions and jaguars and snakes and other big animals because of its cleverness. So the story of Anansi is important for Guyana, that although it is small and weak, it could be very clever, it could be smart, small but smart. In terms of Guyana's role, we should not worry so much about size. We must think about enhancing our capability to participate in the economic and security, cultural life of this continent. Now, what are our advantages? One advantage is, of course, that we are an English-speaking country. It is not a disadvantage. It is a disadvantage when our diplomats can't speak Spanish or Portuguese or Dutch or French, as in French Guyana. But we are an English-speaking country, and many of the countries in the Western Hemisphere want to do business with English-speaking countries, so they don't have translation problems. We are also a country with a long Atlantic coast, and for that reason, we consider ourselves as the gateway to South America. Countries which want to go into northern Brazil could pass through Guyana to get into Roraima state. Because otherwise, Roraima state could only export either by air or through the Amazon, which is one of the largest river in the world. So it's a sort of shortcut for northern Brazil to go into the Caribbean through Guyana, and this has been a subject of debate, geopolitical debate, for a couple of decades. So it is an advantage, and maybe because of finance, and we have not been able to find the finance to build that road to Brazil, even though Brazil has actually constructed the bridge. The whole idea was that the state of Roraima should not be locked into northern Brazil, but should be able to get easy access to the Atlantic, and that access should come through Guyana. So there are advantages in Guyana being more integrated economically with South America, and hopefully one day our children or grandchildren will be able to get in a car in Skeldon or New Amsterdam and drive all the way to Buenos Aires in Argentina without actually having to leave, go by air or leave South American territory. We could benefit from organizations such as the South American Defense Council, which has played a role in the past in quelling disorder, well, not quelling disorder, but in certain resolving conflict in certain Andean countries. And I would like to feel that South America could be a zone of peace. And the whole idea of South American Defense Council, and don't forget that the Brazilian Minister of Defense was here He had meetings with President Zaglio in the early 2000s, and more recently, the Minister of Defense came to Guyana, and I had meetings with him. The whole idea is to keep South America as a zone of peace and prevent conflict from erupting, rather than try to have a military force, a large peacekeeping force, which would intervene afterwards. But I don't think that this continent needs to have foreign intervention or intervention by extracontinental powers. Let us establish councils so that we could deal with conflictual situations before they erupt into violence. And there's a bit too much violence already. And I would say that, from my experience, Brazil has played a role in preserving, through what we would like to call eventually this South American Defense Council, preserving the continent as a zone of peace. Similarly, in terms of our industrialization, we are not well industrialized, our economy is not well developed. And as you know, when the British came here, the Dutch came here, they stayed larger on the coast. They wanted to produce commodities which they could export. And that's why our capital is a port. Georgetown is a port, because it exports stuff. But the country was never really developed, and we speak about the hinterland, and what we end up having is a sort of island. The coast is an island surrounded on one side by the Atlantic and the other side by hinterland, and many people don't ever go into the hinterland. But what we need, of course, is all-round development, and we need to have the benefit of the expertise and experience of countries like Brazil, which have successfully penetrated their hinterland. And as you know, of course, there's a huge Brazilian population in Guyana. Some people estimated it up to 90,000. Many of them have come into the mines, and I believe that the previous Minister of Natural Resources said that about 90% of the diamond economy is in the hands of Brazilians. But they brought technology, and some of that technology, has been used by Guyanese, also in gold mining. And they've also given a different cultural flavor to Guyanese society. I wouldn't deal with that in too much detail. But we can benefit a lot from the progress which the other South American states have made in terms of developing their economy and introducing new techniques. I think if any Guyanese examine the number of agreements we have with the Federative Republic of Brazil, you'd be amazed. There are agreements about the prevention of infestation by Akushi ants, how to improve our yield of sugarcane, and growing other crops. But unfortunately, much use was not made of some of those agreements. But Brazil has appropriate technologies. Only recently, you remember that the construction engineer battalion of the Brazilian Army was here in South Rupununi, teaching the Guyana Defense Force well drilling skills. And for the first time under my administration, the people of South Rupununi particularly were able to get fresh water, potable water, all year round. Before that, they had to be victims of the droughts. And when, of course, the rain fell, it was too much rain, and when it didn't fall, there was too much sunlight, and the land was barren. They couldn't feed their livestock. But Brazil was able to help us with technology, and I do believe that this continentalization of Guyana could eventually be a good thing, because the economy of Brazil, as you know, Brazil is a BRIC, BRIC, it is one of the most highly developed economies in the world, and there's a lot that we could learn. But being clever, being smart is not enough, and Guyana should look carefully at those factors which impair its development. and its integration with the continent of South America. And this will inhibit, all this talk, the dreams about a continental destiny. For one, our infrastructure is grossly inadequate. As you know, President Lula had, during his administration, had contributed to the building of a bridge across the Takutu, but Guyana has not even been able to complete the road between the Takutu and Linden or Georgetown. We don't even have a bridge over our longest river, Essequibo. And even now we are still talking about a bridge over our busiest river, the Demerara, and of course the Borbis. So infrastructure is a big problem, and we need to overcome that. Industrially, Guyana does not manufacture most of the commodities it needs for building, for food, day-to-day living, clothing. In fact, the infrastructure development of Guyana is quite low. Similarly, the institutional impediments. When you enter agreements with countries like Brazil or Venezuela, there is an institutional code, there's a standard. And when you deal with Itamaraty in Brasilia, you're dealing with one of the finest foreign services on earth. And we need to move our foreign service, we need to move our institutions, our Ministry of Home Affairs or Ministry of Legal Affairs, up to the standard at which these organizations, these ministries could cooperate and collaborate with their partner ministries in countries like Brazil or Colombia, Ecuador, Chile. When these people when these countries enter agreements, they expect the agreements to be fulfilled. And they expect there is going to be an efficient public service bureaucracy, an efficient foreign service bureaucracy, which is going to work towards the fulfillment of these agreements. Now, one of the big problems is infrastructure. And a few years ago, we learned about the IIRSA, the initiative for integration of the regional infrastructure integration of South America. And being able to drive to Brazil, to Boavista, Roraima State, will have benefits for the economic development of Guyana. I mean, for a long time, the older members of my audience today would remember the only way to get to Linden was by a ferry called the R.H. Carr. And the administration under Mr. Burnham in 1968 built that highway. And we really could not drive to much of the interior without that highway. The highway is an important element in development. It is not a sideshow. Similarly, the completion of the highway to Lethem from Linden is going to be a major contributory factor to development. And we need to get onto the IIRSA, the Initiative for Integration of Regional Integration in South America, in order to develop our hinterland, even what I regard as our most beautiful region, the Potaro-Separuni region, Region 8. There's no way of moving from east to west in Region 8. You go every year, there's a safari, Pacaraima safari. But this is incredible in 2021 to be talking about a safari. We need infrastructure to develop this country. And that beautiful region will never be developed until it gets proper roads. We cannot develop this country with airports or aerodromes alone. This means that Guyana needs to have a national plan. And when I was in office, of course, I put forward this so-called decade of development, this 10-year development plan. And the present administration needs to take that concept seriously. We need a 10-year infrastructural development plan, which will give us this network of roads so that we can develop our country. We can cross rivers, we can penetrate the hinterland, and we can let our people go in and explore and explode agriculture for our own benefit, rather than staying on the coast and being flooded twice a year and not being able to release the energy, the agricultural and industrial energy that can make this country a major player in South America. So we need to have a strategy, a developmental strategy, which also emphasizes the infrastructure. We need to start industrializing, and I know we depend very heavily on imports. If anyone went into a supermarket, you would find it very difficult to find products which are manufactured, industrial products which are manufactured in Guyana. Many of the manufacturers come from foreign countries, even simple things. And I know a former president used to ridicule my emphasis on things like plantain chips. Even plantain chips. Can you imagine? Pepper sauce we have to import. This should not be. Guyana needs to emphasize industrial development. And the way things are going, it means that the government must put its shoulder behind entrepreneurs who want to industrialize this country. And in terms of the institutions, this is largely governmental. Every time you hear me speak, I will express regret at the administration's decision to shut down the Burton Collins College of the Public Service. We need an efficient public service. We need an efficient foreign service. And we need to build up institutions and stop knocking down institutions. Because when you're dealing with these other countries, on the continent of South America, even around the world, you have to have public service, foreign service, which are capable of meeting the needs of international interaction. And I believe much more needs to be done. My friends, Guyana could become a major player or a more important player in the continent of South America. And we have signed on to so many organizations. And sometimes I could imagine how difficult it is for the Foreign Service to keep track of the number of organizations to which we have put our signature. We are members of the OAS, the Organization of American States. We are members of CELAC. Recently you've seen the president attending a meeting of CELAC. We member of Mercosur, UNASUR, and then of course there's PROSUR. Now, this may seem confusing to the man in the street, the ordinary man in the minibus from Stabroek. But we must be careful. We must not take these organizations for granted. During the regime of President Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, a division was created between institutions which Mr. Chavez felt were pro-Washington, pro-America. And he wanted to have more organizations which were more aligned with his perception of what the South American people really wanted. So he established things like ALBA, an alternative organization, a Bolivarian organization for people of the Americas. And of course he had other initiatives like Petro-Caribbean and so on. But some of them are ideologically slanted in one direction and some are slanted in another direction. My view is that within those organizations, there's no need to scrap and destroy, but they can be reformed. Because governments change, the organizations go on from decade to decade. But, the ideologically committed presidents would eventually leave office. Let the people speak. Let the people have this type of integration organizations which they want, which they feel are suited to their needs. So we need to continue to play a role in these continental organizations, and we should not step back. But if we are to play an important role in these organizations, we have to have strong domestic institutions, and we come back to what I regard as the three most important ministries in international relations. First of all, there is the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs is the face of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana and the continent. That is the first organization with which diplomats have to deal. Secondly, there must be a Ministry of Legal Affairs. All international arrangements are bound by some code of law. Agreements have to be signed to. Obligations have to be fulfilled. I was very astonished a few months ago to see the Prime Minister leading a delegation to a foreign country to sign an agreement with a foreign state. But there was no trace of, well, up to now, I don't know whether the agreement has been published. I don't know if maybe the cabinet approved the agreement. I don't know if the Minister of Legal Affairs approved the agreement and asked cabinet to grant it no objection. The thing is, we have agreements with other countries. For example, the Caribbean. We have agreements with, Southcom. I remember Mr. Pompeo, Michael Pompeo was here last year, September. And all of these are not necessarily embedded in municipal law, but they have certain obligations. And the Minister of Legal Affairs, or the Ministry of Legal Affairs, is a very important player in understanding and in drafting and interpreting international agreements. And of course, we have the Ministry of Home Affairs, because when you're speaking about transnational crime, the Ministry of Home Affairs, as it is now called, has to be a key player. We're talking about money laundering, we're talking about trafficking in persons, we're talking about this notorious cocaine trade, which involves, shipments to Rotterdam in the Netherlands, to Antwerp in Brussels, to Hamburg in Germany. And it means that all three ministries have to work together continuously, not episodically, continuously, if Guyana is to derive the fullest benefit from its international agreements, particularly if we're speaking about South American continent. If you are familiar with the Spanish system of colonial administration, you would know what bureaucracy means. And if we are to make progress with these countries, I don't think we need to try to equal them in their bureaucracy, but we need to make sure that agreements are carefully hammered out, carefully documented, and followed up, and that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is structured in a way that it should not let agreements fall through the cracks in its administration. There must be desks or bureaus or departments which ensure that those agreements are acted on and that they are followed up with the respective subject ministries. For example, if you're dealing with Brazil on the extermination of Acouchians, somebody in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has to be calling up the Ministry of Agriculture to follow up on that matter, a matter of trade, a matter of tourism. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs should be a powerhouse of bureaucracy, and it needs well-trained people. And I lament again that the Foreign Service Institute does not seem to be functioning. I may be wrong, but I wish that somebody can prove me wrong. And I would like to see the Foreign Service Institute as a training institute for young persons, young cadets going into the foreign ministry. Similarly, I'd like to see one day during my lifetime the restoration of the Bertram Collins College of the Public Service, so that young cadets in the public service could be properly trained and go out into the continent and into the Caribbean and represent Guyana. And of course, the Ministry of Home Affairs. Crime is no longer a local issue. It is not a matter of putting out fires and locking up people. It is a matter of preventing the entry of drugs into Guyana by airplane and through the ports. It's a question of preventing trafficking in persons. It's a question of preventing, money laundering. These three ministries are very important to Guyana's development, and if we are to pursue this destiny, this continental destiny, all three of them must work together and give Guyana the best possible representation as, I say it again, as a continental country while preserving our Caribbean characteristics. Thank you.